Hello, this is Kamla Show, where we bring you interviews and conversations with technologists, entrepreneurs, filmmakers, and other newsmakers from in and around the San Francisco Bay Area. My guest today is award-winning filmmaker Kevin Macdonald. One Day in September, Touching the Void, Still Play, The Last King of Scotland, Marley, and Life in a Day are some of the films he's made. His latest film is Black Sea, with Jude, Michael Smiley, Ben Mendelsohn, and a cast of Russian actors. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing good. I apologize for saying a cast of Russian actors. I have to take cover and let you know that I can't pronounce most of those Russian names.
Well, neither can I, so that's fair enough. All I can tell you is that 3 of them are called Sergey, which it makes it simpler but also very confusing. When you're trying to direct 3 actors on the same set, all called Sergey.
So how did you did you have a name tag for them? Sergey 1, Sergey 2?
Yeah, they were called Sergey P, Sergey K, and Sergey V. But they didn't speak any English, and that was one of the interesting things about making this movie, that the cast is sort of half English-speaking and half Russian-speaking. And although the Russian parts are generally a little smaller than the English-speaking parts, they play an integral part in the film. So I had a translator by my side all the time, and there was a lot of discussion backwards and forwards in Russian. It was quite, it made it a little bit more exhausting than a normal movie would be. But I think the results are well worth it. It's so nice to have authentic, real Russians in this film, and there, several of them are very well-known actors in Russia, famous actors, particularly one called Konstantin Khabenskiy, who is, I guess, the Anthony Hopkins of Russia, shall we say, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And he's the gentleman who gets killed first in the film.
He's the gentleman who gets killed, yeah. And there's also the younger actor who survives. He is a man called Grigoriy Dobrygin, and he is, I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sure, but he is, some of your listeners may have seen him in A Most Wanted Man, the Philip Seymour Hoffman film. He is the most wanted man in that.
Oh, he's the terrorist that comes.
Exactly.
Okay. So you mentioned in an interview that, you're drawn to stories that make you think. And I was wondering what drew you to Black Sea?
Well, I think, to revise what I think you quoted me as saying, I would say that I'm drawn to stories that are really good stories, that are good yarns. And I think story is so important in films, and maybe sometimes it's forgotten. I want people to be on the edge of their seat, wanting to know what's going to happen next. But at the same time, as entertaining people, I like there to be another kind of subtext to the movies, I suppose. That I want them to also, to have some ideas in them. And I don't see why you can't have an entertainment cinema which also has ideas and maybe challenges you a little bit. I think the two things can live side by side. For me, the perfect film is an entertaining film that is also thought-provoking. But what drew me to Black Sea, I came up with the idea myself, actually, quite a long time ago. I mean, partly I just love submarine movies. It's a great genre of films, and I've loved them for a long time. But I came up with the idea specifically after the Kursk disaster, which was a famous Russian submarine disaster in the year 2000, when a Russian submarine went down during some exercises, and a lot of people died instantly, but one compartment of sailors survived, and they ended up on the bottom of the sea, about 100 meters down, and they survived for several days because they couldn't be rescued because the Russian Navy didn't have any means of rescuing them. And slowly they asphyxiated and they died, and it's a terrible tragedy, but I also thought, what's the bottom of the sea? And then you start to think, well, what are they doing there? How did they get there? What are they looking for? And that was when I came up with it's not a normal submarine movie. This with a military background. They're actually looking for treasure. They're looking for gold. And so with that basic idea of people stuck on the bottom of the sea who are there because they're somewhere they shouldn't be, they're looking for treasure, I went to the writer Dennis Kelly, who is primarily a playwright in Britain, and although subsequently he's now written the book to the musical Matilda, which some people may have heard on Broadway, and he's written this wonderful series which David Fincher is about to remake called Utopia. But this was his first screenplay that he'd written.
Okay. I want to go back to the Kursk incident. You mentioned, and that was an Oscar-class submarine, one of the largest submarines that the Russians have.
Yes.
And I guess it was a really big deal, and I think Russians didn't know, or the Russian government didn't know when that accident happened. There were 2 explosions, I believe.
There was one initial explosion, as I remember, it's a long time ago, but as I remember, there was one initial explosion, and that was what sank the submarine, and a lot of people died instantly, but there was this group of 20 or 30 who survived in one compartment, and the Russian government was one of the times when Putin really lost a lot of. It was his first term in office actually, and he lost a lot of popularity because people said, why doesn't the Russian Navy have the means to rescue people? They weren't that deep, and the Americans were offering help, but the Russians initially didn't take it, and by the time they did take the help from America, it was too late. So that Putin got really into a lot of hot water with the Russian public at the time. But as I say, that was just really the inspiration for the movie. It's just that scenario being stuck on the bottom of the sea. But in my case, of course, the crew used their ingenuity to find a way to get off, which the poor Russian sailors in the Kursk incident didn't have a chance of doing.
So this is a submarine film on the surface. It looks like an action film. And in your opening statement, you said there are other things happening in the film. So there are undercurrents. Yeah. What are those undercurrents in the film that you're addressing and that make us think?
Well, for me, they are to do with, I guess, two different themes. One is to do with what money does to people, and the love of money, the excessive love of money, and I think which tears the people apart in the film at a certain stage. But also there's this thematic that drives the characters at the beginning, which drive them to set off on this mission to do this really difficult kind of heist, as it were, which is that they are all people who have been laid off. They're all people who have been downsized. They're men of a certain age who have been in the Navy, then left it and never really found their feet. And they feel like they've got all these skills that society doesn't want anymore. And so there's a kind of resentment that's built up, and I guess a loss of self-respect. They feel that they're not respected by society. I guess you could say it feeds into the kind of 99% versus the 1% sort of idea. They feel that other people are rich and respected and they're not. And they want to get their own back on the system, and that's partly what drives them. And I think that thematic sort of runs through the story, it becomes a little more complex than that as the story unfolds. But that's the motivator for them.
So you mentioned in an interview that this film has a strong political undertone. And that when you were collaborating with Kelly in writing the screenplay, Dennis Kelly, you suggested he watch films like Treasures of Sierra Madre and the French film The Wages of Fear.
The Wages of Fear, yes.
The Wages of Fear. And like you alluded, or like you pointed out in your previous answer, it's this draw towards gold and money, and when you get that, I guess there are two things we're trying to do in this film. One is that maybe pointing out the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and what are the consequences. And two, when you get that proverbial pot of gold, that path is not that easy. That's what they get.
I think that's also what's interesting though about these characters is that they. In one level, they want the gold, but I'm not sure. There's one moment where a character is asked, by another character, what are you going to do with the gold? What are you going to do with the money when you get it? And he doesn't really know. He doesn't really know what he wants to do with it. And I find that very interesting because I think in one way they're driven by wanting it, but it's more about the having of it than what they're going to do with it. It's more about the fact that it's going to make them feel respected and as though they matter than it is necessarily about wanting to buy a house in Malibu.
Did I detect a socialistic kind of thread there? Because maybe I'm reading too much into it. You use the word Mensch and Bolsh, something the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, and the Russian Revolution of the early 20th century.
Well, actually, that is a misinterpretation, because what you're hearing is actually the Russian word for more and less. Yeah, yes. Mensch and Bolshevik, which is where the word Menshevik and Bolshevik they come from. Those political parties, their names come from the Russian words for more and less.
Right.
And so yes, that is a misinterpretation. Although I think Dennis and I did talk a lot about how, in a funny way, the movie presents two different potential views of human nature. One view is that espoused by Jude Law's character Robinson, which is that we can share. The working man can share everything, and we will all benefit equally from the fruits of our labor. And then there's the other viewpoint, which is that of the kind of executive, the middleman, and his view, played by Scoot McNairy, and his view is that just give people the minimum that they will accept. You keep everything yourself, because if you try and share it equally amongst everyone, people will just start fighting amongst each other because they want a bigger share. And that's what he sort of says. That's what human nature is. That people will be so greedy and they will distrust other people. They have to be kept in check. They have to be told what they're getting. There has to be a hierarchy, effectively. And I think that argument, in a way, between those two views of human nature goes on through the movie. But I'm not quite sure who wins. I don't think it's that clear cut. You could say that the more pessimistic view of human nature is the one that proves to be true, but then it is actually, without giving too much away, it is Scoot McNairy's character who brings about their downfall. So he's the one who is not in solidarity with the others.
Fraser, that is Fraser.
Well, that's not Fraser, but Daniels, the Scoot McNairy character. He's the one.
Oh, right, the middleman.
Yeah, he persuades Fraser, to do what Fraser does without giving too much away.
Yes.
He's the one who destroys things because of his lack of loyalty and solidarity and following the captain. So yeah, I think it's uncertain which viewpoint of human nature triumphs.
This is true because, the unintended consequences of what happens, actually, the most unexpected people actually end up winning in the film without giving the film away. Yes,
exactly.
So does Fraser represent the Hobson view of life as nasty, brutish, and short? And that,
I think he sort of does, yes. I think he sort of does. I think he represents the kind of unbridled human emotions that can't be kept in check, and that there are, in this kind of intense environment of the submarine, both the best in human nature, the willingness to work together, to be a team, to survive at all costs, is pitted against the more animalistic Hobbesian side of human nature, which he represents.
Now, films are in your DNA in a sense. Your grandfather is the famous filmmaker, Emeric Pressburger. When did you first discover film? Because, again, in another interview, you mentioned that your older brother, Andrew, who produced Trainspotting and 28 Days Later, was the one who wanted to be a filmmaker. What did you want to do when you became...
When I was growing up, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist, I think. And it was only when I left university and I couldn't really get a job as a journalist. I didn't know how to get a job. It was a time of great recession in Britain, and there weren't many jobs around. And I started making documentaries for fun. Just sort of fell into making little homemade documentaries, and on a home video camera. And those I just got interested in. I guess it's a form of journalism, using film as journalism. That's what documentaries are. And so I started making documentaries, and then I started getting interested in the idea of feature documentaries for cinema, theatrical release, and that then led me to making fiction films, where now I alternate really between doing fiction and documentary. I try to keep a finger in both pies, as it were.
Okay. So your first film was a documentary on your grandfather?
I was certainly the first film of any ambition. It's not a very good film.
I tried looking for it. It's not available on YouTube.
No, it's not available, luckily. That was the first sort of longer form thing I made, and then I made documentaries for television for a few years before making a film called One Day in September, which was a feature documentary.
Right, and One Day in September is about the Munich Olympics, right?
That's correct, the Munich Olympics massacre in 1972. What
is brewing in your mind? Is it The Last Train to Memphis? Is that the next project you have?
Well, I'm currently making a documentary in China, or between China and the U.S., which is about a well-known Chinese artist called Tsai Go-chang, who uses fireworks and gunpowder in his work to create literally explosive work, and it's very cinematic. And I'm making a film about him and about the art world in China at the moment. And then I'd like to find another fiction film. I don't have one at the moment. I've got a few things bubbling along, but nothing that's ready to be made.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for your time, and best of luck with your new film, Black Sea.
Thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.
You can download our podcast from our website or subscribe to them on iTunes. And you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @Kamla. And as always, thank you for tuning in.